Hey nerds, what's up? Today I'm going to be talking about what actually makes a fantasy novel adult. See you after the jump. So I've noticed a trend recently that a lot of fantasy novels that are intended for adults are getting pushed into the YA category. And what reviews have said are things like, this says this book is for adults, but it's too clean to be an adult fantasy book. Apparently, what makes a novel adult is to have graphic sex and violence, often including abuse. I personally reject this trend. I don't like the idea that if a book is not gritty in some way, that it's not adult. I think there are plenty of other things that should make a novel adult besides just sex and violence. And not to be too critical, but honestly, a lot of books that I see use these things, it almost feels like laziness. It's like the author just put these in because they were afraid of getting the YA tag. So they thought, well, if I throw in some sex, abuse, and violence, I'll get an adult tag, no problem. So today I want to offer some other ways that I think fantasy novels can be considered adult, and I hope that authors start making more use of these because I don't think grittiness is the only thing that makes something adult. And to be clear, I don't think a book needs all of these things to be considered adult. I think they honestly only need about one or two. So let's jump into it. Number 1, adult characters. This may seem dumbly obvious, but if you think about your favorite fantasy series, I think you'll be surprised by how few of them actually have adult characters. Fantasy is obsessed with youthful characters. In fact, the only thing that actually makes a novel considered YA is the age of characters. I seriously Googled it, that's it. So I think what's happening in fantasy is that authors still want to use young characters, but they don't want to be considered YA, so they throw something gritty and inappropriate in it. I just want to challenge authors to start using older characters. Like, older characters can have character arcs, older characters can go on adventures too, just ask Bilbo. Number 2, advanced prose. So supposedly, the average reading level in the United States is 7th or 8th grade. Guys, we can do better than this, right? Hopefully as avid readers, we have a little bit of a higher reading level, but one way to increase our reading level and to get better is to read harder vocabulary, to read harder prose, to read more complex sentences. And I think one way adult fantasy can be more complex is if it has more complex prose. Now, the interesting thing about this one is it doesn't mean that someone in high school or a young adult couldn't read this book, but hopefully the complexity of it would be more geared toward an adult because we've read more and we've been exposed to more. It's kind of interesting. It's something I don't see like in a ton of fantasy. There's some famous examples, like maybe The Name of the Wind, but a lot of the times this one is just really overlooked. Number 3, the scope of the series, the number of characters, the complexity. Now this one I think a lot of adult fantasy probably takes into account today. But really, as adults, we should have more patience, right? We should have more patience for longer novels, for keeping track of way more characters and maybe a complexity of narration. I would hope that as adults we're better at that. And I think that's one way we can push it more into that. You know, younger novels geared towards teenagers maybe are simpler and more easy to follow. Now, I've only read the first Malazan book, so if it gets super graphically sexual or violent in the later books, I'm sorry. I've heard that it doesn't though. But Malazan is an adult book because it is very complex. There is a lot going on, and I know a lot of people feel very confused when they first read that book. I know I did. So I think that's a good way to make something adult. Like, okay, let's put more characters, let's put more complex ideas, let's put things in that we need to keep track of more, because that also requires a maturity of a reader who has read enough to keep track of those things. Number 4, morally gray. Now this is a big one for me. When you think of the really famous books for YA or middle readers, and you think of Harry Potter and the Hunger Games and Narnia and Percy Jackson, you'll notice they're very black and white. They are good guy, bad guy. Some of them try to maybe get a little bit more complex at the end, like Harry Potter, but ultimately it's very obvious who the villains are and who the heroes are. Now, as we grow up, we unfortunately realize that the world isn't black and white. I think often as children we hope it is. We hope there's the good and the bad and it's easy and simple, but we know in real life it isn't. And I think that when books explore that moral gray area, it really appeals more to adults who kind of understand those themes. And I think the perfect example of this is Wheel of Time. You know, Wheel of Time was the first adult fantasy novel I actually ever read, moving from YA to adult fantasy, and at first it actually confused me. I'd be like, wait, everyone says the White Cloaks are good, but I've met them and I kind of don't like them? Or everyone is saying that they hate the Aes Sedai, but I really like Moraine. What's this about? I was confused because I was so used to YA fiction telling me who to like and who not to like, that reading this expansive world where opinions were different and you weren't really sure who was good and who was bad, and it was complex sometimes, and people had good to them and bad to them, was really different. And I came to just absolutely love that about the series because it felt so real and it made the reader make decisions on who they liked or not, and it would be different depending on the reader and what their life story was. And I think that sort of complexity really pushes something into adult, and it's difficult and it's not lazy and it's not easy. And I wish more of the books I read explored that because I think it's a very cool thing. Number 5, understanding that only comes with age. So this one's a little harder to explain, so I'm going to use 2 examples, in The Princess Bride and in Discworld. When I was a kid, The Princess Bride was my favorite movie. I just loved it. And then when I kept watching it, and when I watched it as an older teen, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I didn't get this movie as a kid. This movie has layers, it's sarcastic, it's satire. And reading the book as an adult, I thought there is no way I would have understood this as a teen. Like, would I have read it and enjoyed it? Completely. I would have got it on a surface level. But reading it as an adult, I understand all of the satire and the complexities. Discworld's the same. Could I have read Discworld as a kid? Yes. Discworld is always clean. It's free from all that graphic stuff. So is The Princess Bride. But Terry Pratchett is extremely satirical. He satirizes politics and human nature and just the world at large in a way that I just don't think you can have an understanding of as a younger person. You really need to have lived so much life and seen things in play to understand those things. So even though it's perfectly clean, it works on this higher level that you've had to live so much life to really appreciate and understand. And again, I think this is an excellent way to make something adult because it is nuanced and it's intelligent. Okay, so those are my top 5 alternative ways for fantasy to be considered adult. I'll be honest, I'm really tired of books being considered YA because they're too clean. Shouldn't we set the bar higher than that? Isn't our reading ability better than that as adults, that's the only thing that makes something considered old or adult? Let me know in the comments if you think I'm totally off base, if you prefer adult novels to be gritty, or if, like me, you like to change it up a little bit. And as always, if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you would like to see what I'm currently reading, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.